صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. We're going to start the program today with the recitation of Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير. الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز الغفور. الذي خلق 7 سماوات طباقا ما ترى في خلق الرحمن من تفاوت فارجع البصر هل ترى من فطور ثم ارجع البصر كرتين ينقلب إليك البصر خاسئا وهو حسير. ولقد زينا السماء الدنيا بمصابيح وجعلناها رجوما للشياطين وأعتدنا لهم عذاب السعير. وللذين كفروا بربهم عذاب جهنم وبئس المصير. إذا ألقوا فيها سمعوا لها شهيقا وهي تفور تكاد تميز من الغيظ كلما ألقي فيها فوج سألهم خزنتها ألم يأتكم نذير قالوا بلى قد جاءنا نذير فكذبنا وقلنا ما نزل الله من شيء إن أنتم إلا في ضلال كبير. وقالوا لو كنا نسمع أو نعقل ما كنا في أصحاب السعير فاعترفوا بذنبهم فسحقا لأصحاب السعير. إن الذين يخشون ربهم بالغيب لهم مغفرة وأجر كبير. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you very much for the recitation. Today we're very fortunate to have Dr Amina Inloes, who will be speaking to us from the Shahadat of Imam Ja'far Sadiq. Let's welcome him with salawat ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad.
They may as well increase their salawat by doing more salawat.
Allah.
Do I get to use one of these?
Oh, sorry. Are you using?
It's the one that says Mehfil Friday.
Which Friday?
Yeah, that's the problem. While I get started, I'm going to warn you about the subject. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. So my condolences on the martyrdom of Imam Sadiq, peace be upon him. You know, I'm going to have an honesty moment. Why not? I have to say I feel less sad about the martyrdom of Imam Sadiq compared to the other Imams because he was able to live an unusually rich life. We know he taught an enormous number of students, whether it's in the hundreds or the thousands, or, because we see all the different numbers in history books. Most of us can't even lay claim to having 5 outstanding students whose lives we've changed all on our own. We may have participated in their education, inshallah, but it's usually a group effort. But there are many people who trace their lineages of knowledge back to him. And in a diversity of subjects, of course, the most celebrated being, not the most celebrated, but the most commonly mentioned being fiqh. But there's something for everyone. Even if we just open up Bihar al-Anwar, for example, there's narrations about the cosmos, astronomy and so forth. There's ethics, spirituality, and a broad range of topics. As we used to say in the past, people were polymaths and knew about many things. And he was also among those who heralded the flourishing of writings and research in the Islamic world and civilization. And so that was a unique time he lived in as well. So I feel it's, after living a life like that and being offered government position and just turning it down, so saying, no, I'm not basically going to sell myself out for something else. This is my job and my mission here. To be martyred is a bit of an honor. It's a bit of, the end of a good lifetime. But of course, my condolences as well. I just figured I can have honesty moments here. So anyway, we're going to be talking about a interesting subject, which in some ways, in my view, it does very much tie in with his legacy. Some people refer to his time as a sort of revolution in knowledge in the Muslim Ummah, because unfortunately, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, up until basically the time of Imam Sadiq, during the Umayyad Caliphate, there was a sort of waning of knowledge. That is to say, during the time of the Prophet, the people around him learned directly from him, or they learned from each other, and so there was more awareness of the message. Whether everything went right or wrong, at least his presence was there. But unfortunately, during the Umayyad Caliphate, especially since a great many of them were not overly concerned with religiosity and associated values such as social justice, ethics, and so forth, there was a lot of ignorance about Islam among Muslims, which is something I think sometimes we don't appreciate. I don't mean you. I mean, sort of we in a sort of collective sense, because when we think about the early era of Islam, sometimes we feel like, well, it's pure and everyone knew everything, and it's just nowadays people are running around spending their time on Instagram talking about Islam and so forth. If that's you, that's totally fine. I'm sure you're saying good things on Instagram. But what I'm saying is there was actually this gap in the early history of Islam, which combined with the spread of Islam rapidly to a lot of different places where people didn't necessarily have access to teachers or resources the way we often do today. So to bring that back, especially the 5th and 6th Imams, Imam al-Baqir and Imam Sadiq, peace be upon them, were instrumental in elevating the level of knowledge of the people and really helping develop the legacy of the Islamic sciences and fields of study of Islam, which we have today. So that is something he is well known for. Of course, we do know that one factor in the, one factor in Imam Sadiq being able to leave such a legacy was the political hiatus at his time, if you will, and that there was a transition from the Umayyad to the Abbasid caliphates. You know, if he were here, he would know how to do this. You know, according to Al-Kafi, the Imams know all the things, but that's okay. But in any case, and so, again, rather than get pulled into the political situation, he did keep focused on teaching and service, you know, as genuine service to the people. That is part of what enabled him to do that, because as we know, unfortunately, there was a lot of persecution during the Abbasid Caliphate, which people did not expect. At least some people did not expect it. I don't know how political I'm allowed to get here, but I'm going to allude to what happened in a certain country that I happen to have been born in. A few months ago, some Muslims had the idea that if they elect the orange man to the presidency, then he's going to go fix certain situations in the world and bring justice in certain regions where, you know, Al-Aqsa is and so forth. You know, similarly in the time of Imam Sadiq, some Muslims and followers of Ahlul Bayt sort of bought into the Abbasid party line that, you know, we're Ahlul Bayt and we're going to, you know, somehow make the situation better. But of course, it got worse. So it's always good to have discernment with politics and when dealing with political entities, whether they be people, parties, or whatever, who are maybe not masoom, which is a great number of them, you know, to be cautious about throwing one's allegiance behind someone when you haven't quite seen how things are going to unfold. And we are seeing that unfortunate situation that I mentioned unfold right now, but that's a topic for another day. Yes, if this is about the politics, I'll leave the politics for there. It's not my specialty anyway. But my point here was that we're also living in a time of the revolution of knowledge. In fact, I was desperately trying to find something on the revolution of knowledge when I was sitting in that chair over there, and that's called my ChatGPT app. I was trying to find a poem about Imam Sadiq. I know it was online because I used to administer the website that it was on. And then, oh, it's really sweet, thank you. To mention extraordinarily prepared. In any case, yeah, that lapsed and I just stopped paying the renewal fee, which I regret. It had like a lot of the poetry about Ahlul Bayt that we used to recite in my younger years. That really I don't hear it anymore. I don't know if people just don't like it or the younger generation doesn't know it. Anyway, not meant to be, but I did ask ChatGPT if it could find it. It offered to write one for me, which was nice. But the point is, this is a knowledge revolution. And so, with this knowledge revolution, it brings up some interesting questions, including questions about religion, including this question, Robo Sheikhs. Sorry, I should be more serious on a Shahadat night. Can artificial intelligence derive fatwas? And this is a 12-er Shi'i view. Now, this is actually a paper I wrote a few years ago, and I wrote it before ChatGPT was introduced to the public. And I did revise it a bit after ChatGPT came out, because that really revolutionized a lot of our thoughts about, awareness of, and discussion about artificial intelligence. But nonetheless, the same question persists, because whether we think about it or I do not look qualified to be talking about this at all. Okay, but whether we think about it or not, of course, there are many ways in which digital technologies do impact our relationship with Islam and in other faiths, religion in general, as well as religious authority. To be blunt, a lot of it goes down to religious authority, because if we go back, say to, let's not go back that far, the 1900s, the literacy rate of the world was much lower in the 1900s. In any country you go to, I'm pretty sure, or at least the vast majority of countries. Thank you. Yeah, and access to books was not too frequent. Certainly, I remember, like, back in the day, but before we had the internet, if you wanted to get a book of hadith, it could be quite difficult. You didn't have them all over the place. And of course, nowadays that we have these things on our phones, for those of us who are fortunate enough to have smartphones, but even if we don't have smartphones, we can find other ways to access this material much easier. And so, there's a shift between a learned class, if you will, having access to religious material versus making it available to people. So this has changed how we interact with religious authority, the questions we ask, and so forth. Similarly, artificial intelligence is changing it. Who has never asked Google something like, am I allowed to eat prawns? Are prawns the same thing as shrimp? Do cod have scales? Okay, you've never done it. But a lot of us do, because we're sitting there at the restaurant with our friends and, what's tilapia fish? Sistani tilapia fish. So, we may be looking for sources that we trust, but we are also using this technology, which is run by a giant, very rich corporation, which is being the go-between between us and religious leaders or books or the Holy Quran. And that's something that's happened very subtly in our lives. And so artificial intelligence maybe just brings up the topic a bit more directly. But there is the question of to what degree could it participate in the shaping of our thought as Muslims? And this is an interesting thought here, especially with the existence of ChatGPT and similar things. When the Qa'im, that's the Mahdi for you all at home. When the Qa'im establishes his government, God will place his hands upon the people. Through his hand, God will unify their intellects, and through him, intellects will attain perfection. Of course, this is one of some narrations talking about a lot of knowledge, and if you will, intellectual progress to be had at the end of times, like near the end of the world. But of course, this does raise some questions. What does it mean for our intellect to be perfected and unified? If we just want the sum total of human writings and facts, it's got it, right? Google pretty much had it. GPT has a lot of it. But of course, while ChatGPT is a very interesting thing and can be very useful for some things, I don't think any of us would say it's an intellect which has reached perfection, and we've seen the fruition of what is predicted in the time of the return of Imam Zaman. So there's something else going on here. So what I'd like to look at is actually sort of bringing this back a step, and that is, what do these things mean in our tradition? What does it mean to know? What does it mean to have an intellect? For that matter, what does it mean to do ijtihad and derive fiqh? And what do our assumptions about that say about the ideas we're going to have about it? So basically, I'm not being prescriptive about the artificial intelligence question here. I'm not going to sit here and tell you whether or not ChatGPT has a soul, or bots have souls, or are they evil, do they have free will, and so forth. These are all other questions which are quite interesting, but they're not relevant. And okay, I'm not going to say they're not relevant, but they're different questions, especially if we are looking at the topic of knowledge in honor of Imam Sadiq, peace be upon him. But rather, sometimes when we look at these boundary questions or these speculative questions, so a bit like things that might come up sometimes in science fiction, where you ask, I don't know, you ask questions that, I'm trying to think of something that wouldn't be disturbing or somehow controversial. I'm going through all the science fiction in my head and I can't find something. But a lot of episodes of the later or middle zone of Star Trek had questions that were oftentimes of a societal or religious nature. So it speculated on what ifs. So there's the what if of what if my artificial intelligence, robo-sheikh, could do ijtihad? What does that say about me and my assumptions about knowledge? And where do they come from? And do we want to keep our assumptions or change them? And I would guess if I interviewed most of you, probably all of you, including myself too, would have a very complex view of what it means to know, and it would probably be derived from a lot of different sources. So this is a bit more of a reflective exercise, largely based in what is in our hadith books, which gets to the last point. How is this a 12-verse Shi'i view? It's because primarily I'm going to be talking about things that appear in the 12-verse Shi'i hadith collections, especially since they are characterized by having chapters specifically on the aql or the intellect. Now, many of these ideas would be broadly reflective of the classical Islamic philosophical tradition as a whole. But I'm going to be talking about source texts within the Shi'i tradition. And that's apart from the fact that I'm Shi'i, so it's going to be a 12-verse Shi'i view. But that's really what gives it that flavor. And of course, when it comes to Imam Sadiq, peace be upon him, there is a lot of discussion about the intellect and how to teach and so forth. I mean, through forms of dialogue and so forth. Sorry, it's COVID. It's post-COVID. Not COVID, it's post-COVID. Very post-COVID. Okay. So one of the questions that comes up, which might actually be unsettling to some people, is the idea of Islam as a system. I don't know about you, but at some point in life I was taught that Islam is a perfect system, and as long as you follow the system, everything will be wonderful in your life and your society. Perhaps some of you have heard that. Perhaps some of you have not. It took a certain amount of personal and spiritual maturing for me to recognize that following Sharia actually doesn't make everything perfect in your life, because otherwise the prophets would have had the most perfect lives, and they had a lot of challenges. And in fact, the hadith do say the mu'mineen are going to be tested. I mean, yes, it will solve some problems. For instance, if you don't drink, you're not going to have alcohol-related problems, and if you don't do other things, you're not going to have those problems. So I count myself very fortunate that I've never had to deal with these sorts of things that that occur when you engage in behaviors prohibited by Sharia. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're always going to have the beautiful house and perfect health and loads of money and everyone loves you because you're saying your prayers on time. Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. Everyone's situation is different. But there is this idea that Islam is a bit like a machine. That's an allusion to the clockwork universe theory. And that this has been very popular. I'm not quite sure when it started. Yeah, maybe one of you can fill me in on that. I've discussed it with people and I've looked around, and I'm a bit vague when it started historically. It's not a modern idea entirely, but I think it picked up in the past century. And this has led some Muslims to treat Islam like a machine. So this is my Islamic law machine. And if you get good input, so the authentic hadith, then you get the right laws and the world becomes perfect. So that's how the Islam machine works. It's a perfect system, according to a lot of Muslims in general. I'm not saying this is like 14th century people saying this. But if you get bad stuff coming out, like maybe fatwas that we're not comfortable with, or we know the topics and the discussion, things that don't sit right to people for whatever reason, rightly or wrongly, that's because the input is flawed. So maybe you have an inauthentic hadith. So a lot of times people will address religious stances that they're not comfortable with by saying, well, is that really an authentic hadith? That's basically the number one thing, authenticity, not necessarily interpretation and so forth. But there's a sort of faith that there is this nice systematic box which generates our Islam for us, and we can just sort of try to be a little bit more scientific about how we approach the religion, and that will fix any issue that we have. That's, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but that's a programming phrase, garbage in, garbage out. And it means that if you put the bad input in, then you get the bad output out. So like, if I put the wrong numbers in my, spreadsheet or whatever, I'm the one to blame because the computer just did its job. I didn't put the right input in. And I would say a number of Muslims today have that view about Islam, or even how things, at least up until recently, have been working in the Muslim majority world. We just haven't been putting the right input into the machine, rather than considering, kind of what's going on with the machine, and maybe Islam is not necessarily systematic. Now, whether it is or isn't is something you can ponder. You may not want to be pondering it at this time of night. I get it, the salat times are late nowadays. But one thing I would point out is that if Islam continues to be seen as a machine, we have machines that can out-logic people nowadays. So like, I'm genuinely impressed, at all of those people who came before us who seem to have had encyclopedic brains, like al-Majlisi, for example. People like that who had an enormous amount of awareness of the tradition. But I would still venture to say that probably Google may be able to pick up texts that he was not able to, because it can just crunch all the data, even if his understanding is much different than a machine's. But the point is, if we continue to perceive Islam as a machine, and I'm not saying that's sort of a classical scholarly view, but that's sort of a common view about Islam, then there's no reason why a machine can't do it. So is that uncomfortable? If that is uncomfortable, we should think about it. On the other hand, it may be very comfortable. Some people may want that, and therefore they would say a machine can do it. And, like I said, I'm here just to provide content for reflection, not to be prescriptive. Then we get to knowledge. This is like one of those long-standing philosophical questions, so I'm not going to attempt to answer it. But if we say the marja is the most learned, what does it mean to know things? This would be so fun to pick on some of you and get answers, but I won't do that. I've nicely divided this into two big generalizations, and I will start with the later one. In the modern/postmodern world, which is the world of the university system as we have it today, in the modern university system, the secular education, exams with marks and so forth, knowledge is usually treated as a thing. So I know the most if I've put the most knowledge things into my brain, and then I can output them and have them measured. So knowledge is it's almost a material quantity, it's numerical, and it lives in your brain. And I admit I'll use this colloquially all the time, that, I'll say my brain is tired or something if I don't want to think of something, or I had a brain fail if I say something weird. Because this is the societal/scientific model that's popular around us, there's no acknowledgement of other metaphysical realities beyond what happened. Okay, I'm not saying no one has an acknowledgement, but I mean in the academic culture, generally speaking, it's assumed if you know something, it's because of something that's happened in your brain, and you've got chemicals and neurons and so forth doing things. These are all relatively new ideas about knowledge. Prior to this time, and of course some people may still retain old-fashioned conceptions of knowledge, such as myself, for example, but that are part of our classical tradition. Knowledge was not necessarily understood to be a bunch of things you keep in your brain, but it somehow involved the soul or higher levels of perception and being and knowing and understanding. So it's not merely a biological property, if you will. This is a narration from Imam Sadiq, peace be upon him, that you may have come across because it sometimes is a bit popular. Knowledge is not extensive learning. Rather, it is a light that God casts into the heart of whomever God wills. That is to say, and of course, maybe not everyone tells this to their kids because they want them to study for their A-levels and stuff, but you can invite the knowledge through studying, and studying is encouraged in our tradition, in our hadith. But actually knowing on a higher level is a process that involves Allah, and it involves a sort of spiritual spark. And it is something that is, it's slightly beyond us. There's a bit of humility with that as well. And you get 10 people together. It will happen with some, it might not happen with others, and we can't say why. Like many other things in life, we can't exactly say why they click with some people and not with others. And so there is this relationship between Allah and the human and other things beyond the human with respect to knowledge, as well as other things in general, that does characterize earlier views of knowledge. And as I pointed at the bottom, for better or for worse, and I actually mean it both ways. I think there's good and bad with it. The Hausa system as we have it today does include both definitions. As you may know, there were a lot of reforms in the Hausa system over the past few decades to make it a little bit more sort of rigorous in its organization and requirements, a bit more similar to a university. So on the one hand, there's a bit more standardization, but on the other hand, that also does move it a bit towards the measuring scholarship through exams sort of thing. And if you think about it, while it is, of course, extremely important for a religious scholar to be learned and to be able to demonstrate their knowledge in reasonable and acceptable ways, whether or not that is exams, what it means to be a spiritual leader beyond just a fact box about religion is something else. For example, many people have been reflecting on the legacy of the Pope recently, and I don't think anyone is talking about him in terms of his encyclopedic knowledge. I don't know, I don't know specifically what he knows or what he studied. I'm going to assume he knows a fair amount about Catholicism or Christianity and so forth. But they're reflecting on political stances they appreciated or social stances they appreciated. And I know some people, not everyone likes the Pope. I don't want to. I don't like to pass judgment about public figures because I feel like as people, we very easily conflate the public face with the inner person, and these are usually different things for everyone. I'll just say that from my observation as a pope, he seemed to do the sorts of things that I would expect a spiritual leader to do, and I found that to be touching. But the point is, when I'm looking at him doing the things I expect a spiritual leader to do, this isn't just about having a lot of facts, it's about something higher. And of course, we expect the Maraja to do things higher too, not just to be well-learned academics. Otherwise, you can find many academics at SOAS and Oxford and so forth who specialize in Islamic studies but may not even be Muslims. But the point is, you're bringing it back to the topic. If you believe knowledge is just learning a lot of facts and inserting them in your brain, again, we have machines that can do that better than ourselves. Yes, ChatGPT may not always be good at regurgitating facts on every subject. It does make mistakes. But the point is we have machines that can contain facts. But if you believe that knowledge is a gift from the divine, for example, that there's an ayah in the Holy Quran that if you have taqwa of Allah, Allah will teach you. Many people take that literally to mean that if you are mindful of Allah, Allah will somehow gift you knowledge and understanding from Allah in a way that's outside of just the conventional means of studying and so forth. If that's your view of knowledge, it's very difficult at least for the artificial intelligences we have now to do it. Again, I'm not passing judgment on would they ever link to law or other things and so forth. But right now, at least, ChatGPT doesn't seem to be primarily directed through divine grace. No judgment. So that's something, again, I think that's largely more about reflecting on ourselves, even if it does relate to the question. So if you do read my paper in its entirety, and it's in one of the issues of the Al-Qalam journal published by the iCare Islamic Studies group, and I don't really know which one, but you can ask them. And I could also give you a copy if you wanted. This is one of the ways I continue this thought experiment. That is, one of the criteria for a marja or a mujtahid, one of the basic criteria is they have to have a decent aql, like they have to be of sound mind. Now, of course, this can be just taken literally as sane. That they're not having hallucinations like ChatGPT sometimes has, which would disqualify it from ijtihad, fair enough. But nonetheless, one can actually take this a bit further and say, well, what does that actually mean to have an intellect? And what I did is I just used the chapter in Al-Kafi on that because it's convenient, with the caveat that once you actually start looking in depth on the chapter on the aql in Al-Kafi, it does lend the sense that, first of all, some different definitions of the aql might be being used. It might not be pointing all to the same thing. And that again gets into complicated discussions that philosophically minded people have, and all the philosophically minded people can come up and speak about them afterwards. But the point is there's a lot going on there, and that's one of the things that does come to mind. And also, this chapter is not necessarily prescriptive for what a marja should have or mujtahid, but nonetheless, it works because we have to talk about something, so why not? And it is the first chapter in the book. So among what is in that chapter, which I'm sure at least some of you have read, these are some things that might come up. One is, do you have to be a human like him to have an aql? Do you need to be human? Guys? Sorry. Who in the Quran has an aql that's not a human? That answer wins. Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah? Thank you. Yeah, angels. Excellent example. Angels are intellecting beings. So that would be one. Jinn also are possessed of an intellect as well. Probably other beings that we are not aware of. So the point is the Quran itself doesn't restrict it to humans. So that enough. Yeah, the question of animals is one I didn't want to bring up because I know we have different views. I don't mean me, I agree with you. Yes, I do think the Quran portrays some animals in a literal manner to be taken as having an intellect. I'm not going to say the same as humans, but they are intellecting beings. Especially the hudhud is quite intellecting. Now, some people might say that's a metaphor or a special situation or whatever. And, yes, I explained to my pet birds why they should eat their vegetable pellets to be healthy, and they don't eat them after I explain. So, anyway, but yeah, I mean, definitely that is among the span of things one could possibly consider. But definitely angels and jinns are among the non-human beings that fit into this category. But nonetheless, it is one to start with. This is also something I mentioned when I was talking about space aliens, for those of you who were here, but it's a sort of all-purpose narration from Imam al-Baqir, peace be upon him. Do you think that Allah only created this world, or Allah did not create any beings except you? By Allah, He's created thousands upon thousands of worlds and thousands of Adams. Keeping in mind that among the core characteristics of the Adam being, which is ourselves, is having the intellect. The intellect and free will are considered necessary things to consider something an Adamite. And so there are probably other things out there that fit into this category. And Al-Kafi also does describe the concept of the aql as an independently created being. Again, we may be getting a bit out of the idea of sanity and rational thought here, but nonetheless, all this points to the fact that, well, it could be a characteristic shared by things that we don't necessarily know about, and at the very least, it's outside of just the biological brain, which does appear more to be like an interface with whatever else goes on in the process of knowing, but not necessarily the boundary of it. So what does our intellect do? Among the things that our intellect does, according to Al-Kafi, is that it makes us aware of Allah. This, of course, is very strange in light of the new atheism movement and all of the present movements. Not really present, I guess maybe from the 50s onward or so, or something like that, which equate science with atheism. You know, nowadays there's this idea among some people that if you are intelligent, that you're an atheist, but of course this is not in our classical tradition. In the classical tradition, theism was considered to be the most logical choice and something the intellect would lead you towards. I had a lengthy chat with ChatGPT when it first came out about its religious preferences, and it decided that God was a logical possibility, which I thought was fine. I mean, fair enough, you know, it's, it can't see Allah and so forth. But the idea that there is something logical about theism has been common in many places for much of history until our time when people became very strange. So here is among one of the narrations from Al-Kafi, that through the intellect one can know who speaks truthfully about God, and one can also know who is lying about God. And this, of course, gets into the topic of Fir'aun. Someone asked Imam Sadiq, peace be upon him, what is intellect? He says, it is that by which God the All-Beneficent is worshipped and the gardens are earned. So then he's asked what was in Muawiyah then, because he was obviously very bright. And the Imam answers that was cleverness and a sort of shaitani characteristic, which is similar to the aql or the complete intellect in the human, but it's something else. It's just the ability to be manipulative. Indeed, when it comes to lesser AIs, such as the ones that follow us around and recommend advertisements on Facebook and so forth, perhaps those are the pseudo-intellect. They are engaging in a bit of devilry for multinational corporations. But this is one of the features of the intellect, not just to pass exams. And of course, the question of whether a machine can or will do that is challenging, because usually the people who are inquiring into the question already have the answer they want in mind. Someone who's a dedicated Christian is probably going to try to get their machine to be a Christian and so forth. I did read an enormously complicated research paper once about some people who attempted to get a symbolic answer from a machine from artificial intelligence technology about theism, and it did favor theism, but that was a very difficult paper to decipher. These are some pre-GPT conversations about the purpose of life and the existence of God and so forth, which, again, it's hard to know where they come from, but it's interesting to see that they got generated. I have to admit, among all of this, the question, where are you now? I'm in the middle of nowhere. That's a bit disturbing, even if it's kind of true. What is the purpose of being intelligent? To find out what is, and to love God and love people. Anyway, interesting to ponder. So, again, coming back to the main idea here, if a artificial intelligence technology were to be considered something with aql, from an Islamic perspective, it would have to acknowledge God in whatever way it does, whether it's logical or not quite sure how that would work perceptually, but however it does that, probably logically would be the first step. And of course, we have many proofs of God in our tradition. In fact, I think all the prominent proofs of God that are advanced by later Christian theologian are first attributed to the Imams and Christian philosophers and European philosophers. This is the one commonly known as Pascal's wager, which is the idea is basically if you have two people, one of them believes in God and the judgment and the afterlife, and the other person doesn't, and they both live their lives and they pass away, if there is a hereafter, the person who believes in these things will be in a better situation. But if there isn't, then nothing's really going to happen. So you're in a better situation if you accept these things. And that's the main idea of it. And it is related that Imam Sadiq actually explained that to someone who came to him, who was denying that anyone created the universe or that it was created at all. And he was so overwhelmed by that he soon passed away. So it was a very moving proof of God. So this is one of the logical ways of approaching it. Interestingly, it's also emphasized that our intellects should lead us to good ethical decisions. This is an excerpt from a very lengthy narration in Al-Kafi about the things that are associated with the intellect versus the things that are associated with an absence of intellect. And I do find it interesting to ponder that certainly sometimes in our era, we do expect people who, for example, perform well academically or who are celebrated academically, maybe they're a Nobel Prize winner or something, we expect them to be good people. I remember once when I was in my teenage years that there was a murder case that was really shocking to a lot of people around me. And this young man who'd been, sort of the highest scoring student or thereabouts in his school, and his friend, I think, they killed someone. And there was this shock that how can this excellent student kill someone? And of course, there's no correlation. Your marks in school don't have anything to do with crime or not committing crime. I mean, not like in a direct way. I'm not getting into like statistics and so forth. But what I mean is that there are different things. Being able to do maths doesn't make you a good or a bad person inherently. But there's an expectation that it would make someone a good person. And I think in our time, sometimes that is due to, again, this sort of material view of knowledge, if you will, that if you're getting the right number marks, and this is sort of leading to your success in society, in the eyes of society, then how could you somehow do things that are against what people expect? But there is a deeper link between ethics and the intellect in our tradition, including in Al-Kafi. And here I have to say, I don't think artificial intelligence is either here nor there. It doesn't, to our knowledge, have mercy, and it doesn't have anger, because it doesn't have these sorts of feelings. It doesn't have thankfulness or ingratitude. It doesn't have humility or arrogance. I don't know. Perhaps there might be a sort of humility, because humility can oftentimes be the absence of arrogance. But in any case, this is something that the aql gives us as humans. And so this is one way where artificial intelligence doesn't score for having the aql that it needs. How much time do we have? Oh, really? Okay, so that means you're going to have to wait in eager anticipation and get a copy of this paper to actually read the rest. But I shall summarize the rest. One of the things the aql does is it controls our desires, whether those are the sort of main animal desires, like my pet bird likes to eat sticks of millet and not vegetable pellets, and it's got great animal desires to eat the millet. And similarly, some of these desires are more ego desires, if you will. We want to be, we want to have sometimes have authority over people, or we don't want people to have authority over us, or we want to show off or whatever. These things are generally tied into the, ultimately the animal aspect of the human being anyway. But nonetheless, the intellect is something which controls this side of the human being rather than letting us be controlled by it. Here, the artificial intelligences, to my knowledge, have an advantage because they don't have an animal physiology. They're not getting hungry. They don't have fights with each other. Well, they might have fights, but they don't have like chemicals in their body saying, fight, fight. And so that's something it seems like they can do a bit better. Like the angels. The angels don't have animal desires, as is narrated. So, you know, in that regard, they are not grappling with that the way that human beings do. The aql has other characteristics, and so forth. So to sum up, can a machine do ijtihad? That question is probably going to have a lot of answers in the next century or so, and we'll have a lot of debates about it. But I would ponder that they are superior in some aspects of the aql, but inferior in others, which, to be honest, is not different from things in the animal kingdom. Most animals are superior. Many animals are superior to humans in one way or another, but not in all the traits of the aql. So like cats. Cats can be very vicious. I mean, they can be very serious fighters. If you've ever had a mad cat after you, they're superior at, you know, jumping and climbing and so forth. But they're not superior at computer programming. So this is one of the traits of the human being, that we've got all of these characteristics with respect to what the aql is supposed to do. There were some other things I brought up, you know, which they're basically things to ponder and things to think about. How do we idealize what it means to be the most learned? You know, are we just looking at it and imagining it's a bunch of facts, or is it something more and something greater? And perhaps will we change the way we talk about these things? And I think we tend to do this anyway when we talk about our most, you know, influential or moving spiritual leaders among Muslims. At the end of the day, we're usually not talking only about how much they have studied, because we assume anyone who's a scholar has a decent level of scholarship. But there's usually something more, a social vision, a spiritual vision, a sort of spiritual charisma, or something about them that sets them apart from other people. And you know, I do think that now that we have machines that can really do all of this, we might focus even a little bit more on those things rather than just the studying aspect of scholarship. And it's also an invitation to think about how we personally see knowledge and knowing with respect to ourselves. And these are my parting thoughts, which I will let you ponder on. And that many Muslims see fiqh in a very procedural way. And I'm not trying to say this is all that goes on. But again, the sort of algorithmic box of input and output. And if we see it that way, a machine could do that quite well and better than a person if you just set up the rules. But if you're taking approaches that involve newer issues, or not newer issues, there's newer issues sometimes, but varying approaches that require more of a human judgment. And again, I don't want to get into sticky territory here, but you know, the social contextualization issue, for example, that's something a machine would not do very well, because it doesn't, it just can't really grapple with that the way a human could. Or for example, if you're looking at the intent of the law or varying circumstances, These are all things that a human being would do much better. So that's an interesting thought to consider, that although some of the newer approaches to Islamic law are these more focused a little bit more on the human side of things, they're less likely to be doable by technology, which is quite new. So I find it quite interesting we have these things persisting in our time. Anyway, I hope this was interesting food for thought, and I'm sure we'll have some very interesting discussions. And so I think, inshallah, we'll probably have a few people to commemorate Imam Sadiq, peace be upon him.
Thank you very much. Salat. Any questions?
Wow, he's got one.
Assalamu alaikum. You said that as Adams, as human beings, we have free will. We have an option to do what we want. We can be good or bad. I'm going to argue with that opinion because Allah knows we're going to do this. Allah knows we're going to do that and then maybe switch to that. Allah knows we're going to do what not. Whatever we do. So, how can we have free will if Allah already knows it?
Whose kid is this? Yeah, that's a common question. And of course, how much free will we human beings actually have is a question that many people have debated in the past and continue to debate today. And a sort of general view is that there are things we don't. In fact, I think it's narrated from Imam Sadiq. It's one of the Imams, I think Imam Sadiq, that there's a group of things we don't have free will in, such as who your parents are you tall, are you short, where do you get born? You know, these are things that they're just part of I don't know, our bio data or whatever, but there are other things we do have free will in, like you said, whether we choose to be good or bad. I would say that oftentimes there are situations that happen in our lives that we don't necessarily seem to have free will in them happening, but we can choose how to respond to them. And some of that is an outer response, you know, what you choose to do in the circumstance. And some of it is just an inner response, how we handle it inside ourselves, because sometimes we don't have outer choices. But your question was a little bit different. And so this can be a difficult thing for people to handle because we are limited in how we see the world, whereas Allah is unlimited. But let's pretend you have free will. What did you do 1 hour ago? Okay, let's just say let's say you had free will to ask that question. Did you feel like you had free will to ask the question?
Yes, but that's only from our perspective. From reality's perspective, none of us really have this free will which allows us to do whatever we want. There's no restrictions and whatnot, and nobody knows that you're going to do it. It's free will, it's surprise.
Yeah, see, I'm getting there. Yeah, so let's say you had free will to ask the question. Now, do you have free will to change what you did because you know what you've done? Can you go back 5 minutes and not ask the question?
Not necessarily.
Yeah, that's a no, because it's done. Because that's in the past, and as people, we look at the past as something that we know and is already done. So Allah doesn't have past and future. Like being in time, you know, like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock is for humans. Allah doesn't do that. So because everything has already happened in the mind, if you will, of Allah, then Allah knows everything. But it doesn't change the fact that when we're in the process of doing something, we experience the experience of free will. And so if you think about things that you've already done in life, you can't change them, but you feel like you have free will in the present. That's probably the easiest way for people to think about it, because we are different from Allah in how we see reality. But in any case, a very healthy attitude to have in life is to assume we have as much free will as possible and try to do as much as we can to improve ourselves and the situations around us, and to do what we think is right. And if it's not meant to happen, then it won't happen. But all we're expected to do is to try.
Thank you. Last question.
Okay.
Amina, assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. I was thinking about this quite some time. The dependence of the whole of the AI on the inputs. Now, if the input is favoring, for example, settler colonialism, whatever you ask, we'll just say, yes, this is better than that. Now, culturally also, if the inputs are always, at the moment, obviously they are very West-centered, then the whole cultural output will be the same. So I think unless there is an equality of feeding, because the machines are only regurgitating what information, not fed into them, but they are stealing information from everywhere and everywhere. And we know from reading literature in universities and so on, that certain viewpoints are pushed. Now, what happens here then? If you are also being pushed in the same direction, especially if you go outside your, it's an English language, or European languages, into, well, Chinese have got their own, and then we might need something in Arabic and other kind. So I think the outputs are really, at the moment, quite dodgy.
Yeah, that's a major issue. That's definitely among the reasons why it's better not to have one group of people with a monopoly over this technology. And certainly there are many Muslims who feel the same way, and that we should also be actively involved in how this technology is used. And of course, I don't want to limit it to Muslims. I think as human beings in general, it's ideal to have a bit more of an equitable share. On the other hand, unfortunately, one of the things we see historically is that newer technologies frequently tend to serve the cause of the elite, and that's definitely how thinking machines have been envisioned. Even before we actually had them, they're always seen as something that appeared to actually support, those with power and not the common people. Unfortunately, there is a lot of that going on with artificial intelligence today. I mean, with military applications, for example, or, I was being a bit facetious about the bots on Facebook, but large corporations do use this technology to enrich themselves and manipulate people into enriching them. Of course, it's not so much about the technology, it's about the access and the control. So I do think that's a vital issue. And completely agree.
Just try to ask ChatGPT, what does it think about copyright law? And you will see what happens.
Thank you very much. That's well done. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Thank you very, very much. Just a reminder about our upcoming programs, which are on the screen right now. That's really helpful. Every Sunday we have Husseini Madrasa. You can scan that code. Every Monday we have Mums and Tots at 11 to 12:30, Ladies Pilates 7:30 to 8:30 in the evening. On Tuesday we have yoga and ladies exercise classes. On Wednesday we have karate and taekwondo. Thursday Dua Kuma and Surah Yasin, and on Saturday Women's Walking Club and tuition, and Sunday the Tafsir classes. Every Friday we do have our ongoing corks, which will be on the screen later on. Please do look at them when it does come on. If you'd like to find out more, go on sikkim.org.uk. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.